Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our Benny's Bat section for today, Wednesday, August 19th. The idea of the Benny's Bat section is we try to look at each pitcher that's on the mound today, figure out what their weakness is, and then try to figure out which bat's profile to do the best against them. First guy we're going to talk about today is Jeremy Guthrie. Guthrie's allowed left-handed bats to hit .329 against him with 13 home runs and 67 innings pitched. And he's also given up a .289 batting average with 6 homers and 57 innings to right-handed bats. He goes up against that Cincinnati team today. The only guy whose numbers are jumping off the page is Joey Votto. Votto has a .414 WOBA and a .237 ISO number against right-handed pitching. They really don't have too many other lefties that I'd be looking to use on this team. Maybe if you get a guy like Billy Hamilton hitting up on top of the order, he could be somebody to look at. You also could look at a guy like Jay Bruce, who's a left-hander who might have some power. Again, Guthrie is not good at all to left-handed bats, so if there are any other left-handed bats in there, you can look at them. A guy like Eugenio Suarez might be in play too. He's been hitting the ball pretty well lately. Todd Frazier is starting to break out of his little slump, but he's been swinging it so bad since the All-Star break. I don't know if he's a guy that I really want to recommend, but obviously he's somebody you can look at as well. The next game we're going to talk about, Adam Morgan, left-hander, going up against Toronto at Philadelphia. I got to get something to drink before I start this one. Okay, basically Toronto's a team that I think you should stack. We were actually talking about this yesterday with a couple of my buddies that if you're a guy who multi-enters lineups, you should basically just put one Toronto stack in every night and then figure out how you want to use the rest of those multiple lineups, because this lineup has the ability to go off just about every day. Against left-handed pitching, there's about 7 guys in this lineup that you could put in there. Josh Donaldson has a .458 WOBA, .345 ISO number against left-handed pitching, so he's obviously in play. Russ Martin, .424 WOBA, .254 ISO number, he's in play. Chris Colabello, .384 WOBA, .215 ISO number, he's in play. You got Joey Batista hitting from the right side. You got Edwin Encarnacion. If they go with a guy like Diana Navarro at catcher instead of Martin, or even if one of them DHs, those guys are in play. I mean, basically from top to bottom, everybody in this lineup, Tulowitzki, all of these guys are guys that you can look to use here. Tulo's another one who just absolutely smashed his left-handed pitching. So with a left-hander on the mound, the game is at Philly, which it's not the Rogers Center, but it's also a very good hitter's park. I think that these bats are going to be very popular today. I think it's going to be the most popular stack. And other than Coors Field, I don't think that you can have a good lineup today without including at least a couple of these guys. Next guy we're going to talk about, Matt Cain. Left-handed bats are hitting .375 against him so far this year with 4 home runs and 15 innings. Righties aren't doing bad either. They're at a .260 average against him as well. It's pretty much the worst numbers he's had in the last 3 years. This game takes place at St. Louis, and there's really only one guy in St. Louis who I think stands out based on the numbers, and that's Matt Carpenter. .382 WOBA, .217 ISO number. They're likely going to be dropping him into either the 2 or the 3 hole for this game today. They lost a couple outfielders. Jason Hayward's banged up. Randall Gierchuk is definitely out. They recalled a guy like Tommy Pham. If you remember, when Tommy Pham was up the first time, he was hitting leadoff for them, and they dropped Carpenter into the 2 hole, maybe even into the 3 hole, depending on what they do with a guy like Colton Wong today. So Carpenter is the one guy who I think is going to be, going to be in play. Again, we talked about it the other day. He's been hitting home runs lately, which really isn't his game. But again, we're not going to argue with the points that we get from it. He's a great cash game play. If his price is cheap, he does have tournament upside with the way that he's been getting extra bases lately. So I definitely think that Carpenter is the one guy who I would be using from this game. Next guy we can talk about, Daniel Norris. Daniel Norris has allowed, right-handed bats to hit .283 against him so far since he was traded. I think with the wind blowing out today in Wrigley Field, you can look at a lot of the guys on this Cubs team. Chris Bryant, .340 WOBA, .197 ISO. Again, not the greatest numbers, but with the wind blowing out, I definitely think he's in play. Somebody who has a ton of power. If he gets a hold of one, lefty-righty split, I definitely think that he's somebody that can go yard. Let's see. We got Anthony Rizzo. Even though it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, he's very good lefty-on-lefty. 438 WOBA, 207 ISO number. So he's obviously another guy that's in play. Whether it's Schwarber or Montero behind the plate, both of those guys have a lot of power, especially with the wind blowing out. I would try to use the guys who can hit a home run. I don't know if I would really, bump up a guy like Dexter Fowler. But again, if he's on top of the order and he's cheap and he gets on base with all those big bats behind him, he could score a couple runs. If he steals a base for you on DraftKings, he's going to be in a position where he could pay off his salary. But again, Norris isn't a horrible pitcher. He's a young pitcher. He's still trying to figure it all out. But again, with the wind blowing out in Wrigley, it's always something that we look at is, using some of those bats that are there. So I think some of those Cubs guys are going to be in play. Next guy we can look at, J.A. Happ. Left-handed bats are hitting 287 against him, which is a very good average, even though it's lefty on lefty. Right-handed bats over the last 3 years have actually hit him for more power, though. This year, right-handed bats are hitting 277 with 11 home runs and 84 innings pitched. So I think that he has a tough matchup here today against this Arizona team. You got a guy like Paul Goldschmidt, 487 WOBA, 302 ISO. Wellington Castillo, 436 WOBA, 371 ISO, and only 40 at-bats against left-handed pitching. A.J. Pollock, 371 WOBA, 181 ISO. So those are the three guys that really stand out to me. Goldie is incredibly expensive on every site that you look on today. I wanted to put him in a lot of my lineups, and I couldn't. Even Castillo's price has really come up with the way he's been hitting. I think the only place I was able to fit him in over here was on Fantasy Feud. I was a little upset. I had some tough rosters last night. Fantasy Feud ran another one of their qualifiers yesterday. With the seat that went off yesterday, there's only 9 more seats left to their big $500,000 final. So if you haven't got a chance to get there, make sure you get over to Fantasy Feud. If you sign up using the promo code CURVE, you'll get 100% deposit up to $500 and also $25 to play over there on their site. Like I said, there's still 9 qualifiers left to give you a chance to win your way into that big $500,000 end of year tournament that they're having. So make sure you get over there. It's the one company left that still has a big qualifier out there. And it's really something that, you've been seeing a little bit of overlay in all those qualifiers at every price point. So you're even getting a little bit of added bonus by getting in there as well. So definitely make sure you get over there. Or as a matter of fact, make sure you guys don't get over there. It makes it easier for me to try to win my way in. Let's see. The next thing going on, we got Joe Kelly going up today. Right-handed bats are hitting 313 against Kelly with 8 home runs in 46 innings. He's had 2 starts in a row now with 20-plus DraftKings points. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but at the beginning of the season, Joe Kelly was saying how he was going to win the Cy Young, and people were kind of laughing at him. And then he came out and was getting shelled early in the year and got sent down to AAA, so people were really laughing at him. But since he's come up, he's been doing a lot of the laughing at people, especially DFS players who've been rostering against him. I got to be honest with you, I still think I want to roster against him. There's nothing that really scares me away, but he has been pretty good in his last 2 starts. Jason Kipnis is back, so if you're looking for a second base option, 424 WOBA, 169 ISO. Again, he hasn't been jacking out the home runs, as you can see by the low ISO score. For those of you who don't know, basically ISO score is the number of bases above 1 that a guy kind of gets per at-bat. That's kind of like a rough estimate of what an ISO score is. So the higher an ISO score, basically the more bases per at-bat a guy has been able to get, meaning the more doubles, the more triples, the more home runs that he's been hitting. I think that Kipnis is still kind of a little rusty, but I do think that he's somebody that's going to be in play if he's on top of the order. I don't like the fact that his price is jacked up on all these sites. If you got to pay up for the guy, I don't think he's a great option today. But if you can find him somewhere, there are a couple sites that I was looking on, some of the smaller sites, where his price isn't completely jacked up like it used to be. So I think he might be in play over there. Michael Brantley is another guy you can look at, 385 WOBA, 169 ISO. Again, for some reason, Kelly's been a reverse splits guy. Righty on righty has been the way to go after him. But the left-handed bats on Cleveland are really the only ones who hit right-handed pitching well. One other guy I did want to mention, especially if you're playing on DraftKings, is Abraham Almonte. He's got a 494 WOBA and a 429 ISO. He's been absolutely on fire lately, and he's legitimately minimum price on DraftKings. He cost you $2,000. He's been hitting fifth or sixth in that Cleveland order, and he's been producing. He's been getting a lot of hits. I think this is a pretty decent matchup for him against Kelly. Again, this game is in Boston. We said the other day, Fenway Park doesn't really have the reputation, but it is a place that yields a lot of runs. So I think you can look at some of these bats on this Cleveland team. Maybe even a guy like Jose Ramirez leading off. He's been doing a pretty nice job of getting on base, scoring some runs, even stealing a couple bases, and really paying off his salaries on all the sites. Next guy we talk about, Kevius Sampson. Sampson has allowed left-handed bats to hit 251 against him in limited innings pitched so far this year, but that's basically the split that's been doing the best against him. He's been pretty solid. He's been going 5 or 6 innings in his last 3 games, has double-digit DraftKings points between like 12 and 19 in each one of them, and he's seen his price kind of get jacked up a little bit. He goes up against Kansas City today at Cincinnati, which is a good hitter's park. There's 2 guys I really want to look at. Ben Zobrist, who we talked about yesterday, he hit a home run last night. That was a really low-scoring game last night. I was expecting to see a few more runs over there. But Zobrist with a 392 WOBA, 194 ISO, definitely somebody who's in play. The other guy is Eric Hosmer. Hosmer has been very hot. If you haven't had a chance, just go take a look. Whatever site you play on, just go take a look at his game log and look at the numbers that he's put up in his last couple starts. He had, I think last night he actually broke the streak, but he had like 10 games in a row with an RBI. He had like 8 games in a row where he had, multiple hits or not multiple hits, but he's had, a hit in 8 games in a row. I think like 4 or 5 of those games had been multiple hit games. Has a couple home runs. The guy has a little bit of speed. He's even stolen a couple bases. And right now he's got a 405 WOBA, 212 ISO. So I definitely think Hosmer is another one of those guys that's in play. After that, you can look at a guy like Jared Weaver. Weaver has hit 265, has given up a 265 batting average from each side of the plate. Left-handed bats have 10 home runs against them. Right-handed bats have 7 home runs. A guy like Jose Abreu is probably tops on the list to go after him. 385 WOBA, 234 ISO number. The other guy to look at, Adam Eaton, 361 WOBA, 178 ISO number. The game is at LA, which is not an easy place to jack out home runs. It's a decent place to get hits, though. It is a big ballpark. So if I was going to attack Weaver and his 85-mile-an-hour fastball, those would be the 2 guys that I would look to use to go ahead and make some noise against them. Let's see. We got Jorge De La Rosa pitching in Colorado against Washington. Left-handed bats have actually been the way to get De La Rosa. 275 batting average, 1.48 whip so far this year. His ERA at home is actually above 6. So I think obviously Bryce Harper is the guy who profiles best. 410 WOBA, 235 ISO number. You also have a guy like Ryan Zimmerman who's been pretty hot since his return. 370 WOBA, 271 ISO number. But he is 1 for his last 19. So after he came out blazing, he's kind of cooled off lately. I think he only has 1 hit in his last 6 games or 5 games, something like that. And again, 1 for his last 19. That's a pretty tough number. I think you can look at some of those other right-handed bats, guys like a Wilson Ramos or Jason Worth. I think both of them are in play, especially if Worth is back leading off. I don't know why they decided to put him leading off, but he did a pretty good job doing it yesterday. And I guess you could also look at a guy like Escobar. He was batting cleanup yesterday, hit a home run. So there's a lot of guys that I think are in play on this Washington Nationals team. Again, they're all going to be popular. They're all going to be expensive. They're playing in Coors Field. But it's really tough to fade games in Coors Field. I mean, I know last night it might have worked out a little bit if you wound up on Toronto. But if you were anywhere else, you didn't get anywhere near the production that you got out of the Coors Field guys. Let's see, Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray's been alternating good and bad starts lately. Right-handed bats have been the way to go get him. 251 batting average, but he's only given up 5 home runs so far this year, and he only has a whip of 1.29. He goes up against Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh, which is a good pitcher's park, but Pittsburgh actually has a bunch of guys in that team that hit left-handed pitching well. A cheap catching option today I really like is Francisco Cervelli. 450 WOBA, 237 ISO number against left-handed pitching. So those are some pretty big numbers that you get out of him. You got a guy like Sterling Marte, 388 WOBA, 243 ISO number. And you also have McCutcheon, 379 WOBA, 171 ISO number. Even a guy like Young Ho Kang, 350 WOBA, 182 ISO number. I think all these guys are going to be in play. Like I said, Ray's been pitching pretty well. Pittsburgh is a good pitcher's park, so there are a lot of things in his favor. But that Pittsburgh team does hit left-handed pitching incredibly well, so there are also a couple things that are a knock on him. So depending on which side of that coin you're on will probably depend on if you have any of these guys in your lineup or not. Let's see, Jeff Samardzija, next guy up. 3 bad starts in a row for Samardzija, and now he goes up against the Angels at Anaheim. Left-handed bats are hitting 277 against him with 14 home runs and 78 innings pitched. I mean, obviously the guy who always stands out on the Angels and the best guy they have against right-handed pitching is Mike Trout. Trout's got a 412 WOBA, 291 ISO number, so he's on top of the list. The second guy you can look at is a guy like Cole Calhoun. Calhoun has 2 home runs now in his last 3 games, so he's starting to heat up, and he's the best left-handed bat that you could use to go and attack Samardzija. So if you're going to take anybody here, I think those are the 2 guys you really want to look at. They hit on top of the order, and like I said, Samardzija's been pretty bad lately. So I think those 2 guys are the way you want to go get them. Let's see. You got Mark Buehrle pitching for Toronto. Right-handed bats have a higher average against Buehrle over the last 3 years, but he actually hasn't given up a ton of home runs. Couple guys who make sense based on the numbers for that Philly team. You got Cesar Hernandez, my boy, 374 WOBA. Again, he's somebody who can get on base. He can steal a base. He can score a couple runs. If he's hitting on top of that order again, I like him better when he hits leadoff. When he hits behind Chase Utley, sometimes he gets on base with the base pads blocked up, and that's not really what you're looking for. I like when he leads off. This way, if he gets on, I know he's going to be stealing. That's pretty much his game. And on DraftKings with the 5 points you get for the stolen base, that's really where you want to roll a guy like him out there. Guys like Darren Ruff and Carlos Ruiz, some cheaper options for you. Ruff has a 450 WOBA with a 200 ISO. Ruiz has a 423 WOBA with a 211 ISO. So those are the cheap right-handed bats I would like to use if I'm going to attack a guy like Mark Buehrle today. Buehrle really struggles with those right-handed bats. Remember, Philly's a team that gets very right-handed. The only problem that you have is if Buehrle doesn't go deep in the game and they pull him in the 6th, put in a right-handed reliever, you're probably also going to see some of these left-handed bats come off the bench for the Phillies, and you might not get a ton of at-bats out of some of these guys who they start. Next guy up is Ubaldo Jimenez. He goes up against the Mets. He's actually been pretty tough at home. He's got a 3.20 ERA, 2.33 batting average against, and a 1.0 whip at Baltimore, which is surprising because Baltimore's a pretty good hitter's park. Right-handed bats, reverse splits, 271 with a 1.44 WOBA have actually been the way to go after Ubaldo Jimenez. But I don't really like a lot of the right-handed bats of the Mets. I guess Travis d'Arnaud is probably the one guy you could look at. But I think there are some better catching options today. He's not really somebody I'm looking to get into my lineups. Curtis Granderson, who we gave you yesterday, had 2 home runs. He's got a 390 WOBA, 244 average against right-handed pitching. Again, it's a good hitter's ballpark. He's the guy on top of that order. Going to get maximum number of at-bats leading off. He does have power. He does have speed. I think he's more of a GPP play than a cash game play because he's not usually that consistent. But he actually has the best numbers against righties out of anybody on that Mets team, so he's definitely somebody you should look at. Other guy is Lucas Duda. Duda's got a 345 WOBA, 244 ISO number. Again, Duda is more of a tournament play for me. He does have that home run upside, especially playing in Baltimore. It's a great hitter's park. Left-handed bats tend to hit a lot of home runs there. Just look at guys like Chris Davis on their team. So I think that those would be the 2 guys I would look at. Like I said, Ubaldo's been kind of tough at home, but he is a power pitcher, and when power pitchers get hit, the ball tends to go pretty far. Let's see. We got Nate Carnes for Tampa Bay going up against Houston at Houston. Right-handed bats are hitting 250 against them, but the whip is 1.45, and he has given up 11 home runs in 62 innings pitched. The guy who stands out most is Carlos Correa, shortstop option, 367 WOBA, 228 ISO. I think everybody's going to be looking in Tulo's direction today, going up against the left-handed pitcher at Philly. So Correa is going to be more underowned than he usually is. But, I mean, this kid's like 20, 21 years old, and he's just an absolute stud in this league already. He's batting 3rd for that Houston team. He's been smashing. He's been hitting home runs. He's actually got a pretty good glove as well. I mean, this kid is just legit going to be a superstar in this league. So I think Correa is definitely somebody that you can look at and roll out in your lineups. The other guy is Preston Tucker. Tucker's got a 370 WOBA with a 262 ISO number. He's a lefty-righty. He's a lefty, so it's a lefty-righty matchup. Again, like we said, Carnes has been struggling more in the righty-on-righty reverse splits matchups, but Tucker's another guy you can look at. Last guy I want to talk about is kind of an interesting case today, and that's Steven Strasburg. Now, Strauss has been pretty good in his last couple starts. You see a lot of the Team Strasburg hashtag going up on Twitter every time he goes up to pitch, but he's pitching in Colorado at Coors Field today. I don't really know how to go with this. I think he will get a decent number of strikeouts. The thing about Coors Field, and Josh will probably be able to explain this better to you, but what they say is with the altitude, it takes away from a lot of your breaking pitches. You don't get as much movement on it. Therefore, everything is looking a lot straighter. If things are a lot straighter, then they're a lot easier to hit, and that's the problem that they have. So I don't think I'd be using Strasburg, but the way he's been pitching, I also don't know how many bats I want to target against him. The two guys who stand out on the numbers are Carlos Gonzalez, 415 WOBA, 237 ISO, and Nolan Arenado, 387 WOBA, 315 ISO. Those are the two guys who make some sense, one lefty, one righty. Strauss's numbers haven't been really dominant this year against one side of the plate or the other, but a lot of that came earlier in the year where he was still a little banged up and definitely struggling. So, like I said, I don't really know how I'm going to handle this game. I do know that I try not to take pitchers in Coors Field. Even Clayton Kershaw got knocked around a little bit in Coors Field. So even though Strasburg's been good and I do like him, I think I'm going to be shying away from him. And I think you can still use some of these bats. I'm hoping that because it's Strasburg, people kind of shy away from the Colorado bats and look more towards taking the Washington guys going up against De La Rosa. So I think you might be able to get the Colorado bats a little bit more under-owned than you normally would be able to get a team playing in Coors Field. So I think that would be the way I would go. But again, I'm not really confident for it in cash. It would be something that I only did in the tournament, hoping to catch lower ownership than I should on bets that still have a good chance to do something. That's pretty much the last guy that I'm looking to target bets against. You got Lester going up against Detroit. Miguel Cabrera does smash left-handed pitching, 444 WOBA, 268 ISO. So he would be somebody that I might look at against Lester. But again, Lester's pretty good. Syndergaard's going up against Baltimore. Baltimore has been striking out a lot against right-handed pitching. They do have a couple decent left-handed bats, guys like a Chris Davis and even Gerardo Parra now up on top of that order. But again, Syndergaard has been pretty good. I don't think I'm going to be looking to target against him. Jamie Garcia going up against San Francisco. San Francisco, surprisingly, doesn't hit left-handed pitching all that well for a team that has a lot of right-handed bats on it. And Garcia's been pretty good, so I'm not looking to take too many of those San Francisco bats. The only one who really stood out is Andrew Susac, based on the numbers. Everybody else is pretty much below the thresholds that we look at. Kluber's going up against Boston. Again, Kluber's pretty good. Boston actually hits pretty well against right-handed pitching. The one guy who I think is going to be in play, as he has been a lot lately, is Big Papi. He's probably the only guy I'd really look to. Dallas Keuchel's an interesting case too. Houston, they play in Houston today, which is a park upgrade for Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay actually hits left-handed pitching pretty well. Guys like Longoria and Forsythe have really, really good numbers against left-handed pitching. But again, Keuchel has been pretty much lights out all season so far. So again, I don't really know who I'm looking to target in this game if I'm targeting anybody. I don't think I want to take a lot of bats against Keuchel. But again, I just want to let you guys know that Tampa Bay does hit left-handed pitching pretty well, so they might be in play. So that pretty much sums it up for today's section of Benny's Bats. Thank you guys for joining us. As always, make sure you get over to rotocurve.com and sign up for an account if you don't already have one. There's a lot of good discussions going on for Major League Baseball and NFL over on our forums today. So you can get over there and join in on the discussion. Start earning your curve points. You can trade them in for some swag on the site. Also trade them in for money to play on the various sites, or even tickets to some of the see the local teams that you guys like the most, tickets to some ball games and stuff. So all that stuff is in play. You can follow us at RotoCurve on Twitter. This is Benny Ricciardi. You can follow me at BennyR11 on Twitter. And that pretty much sums it up for today's section of Benny's Bats. As always, stay classy, DFS.